Allied forces push into Germany. What they discover in hidden underground facilities makes their blood run cold. Blueprints for weapons that shouldn't exist. Technology decades ahead of its time. Projects so advanced that American and Soviet intelligence immediately launched desperate races to capture the scientists behind them. Jet fighters that could outrun anything in the sky. Rockets that could strike London from hundreds of miles away. And something else? Something the Nazis called Die Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapons. Devices so terrifying that even today, 70 years later, portions of their research remain classified. What if Hitler had finished these projects? What if the Nazi war machine had deployed these weapons just 6 months earlier? You wouldn't be watching this video in English. You'd be speaking German. Tonight, I'm counting down the 10 most terrifying secret weapons Nazi Germany developed during World War II. Some of these you've heard whispers about. Others have been deliberately buried by governments that didn't want you to know how close the Nazis came to achieving technological supremacy. Each weapon brought Hitler closer to victory. Each one was stopped just in time. And the most frightening one, the one that ranks at number 1 on this list, would have changed human history forever if it had been completed. If you're fascinated by declassified secrets, by the hidden history of World War II, by the technology that nearly changed everything, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you documented stories that governments tried to keep buried. Let's begin with number 10 and work our way down to the weapon that still gives military historians nightmares. Asterisk number 10. The Landkreuzer P-1000 Rat, the land battleship. Asterisk in June 1942. German engineer Edward Gropp presented Adolf Hitler with blueprints that seemed impossible. A tank, but not just any tank. A land battleship weighing 1,000 tons. The Landkreuzer P-1000 Rat. The Rat would be the largest armored vehicle ever conceived. Imagine a moving fortress, 115 feet long, 46 feet wide, 36 feet tall. It would dwarf every tank on the battlefield. In fact, it would dwarf most buildings. The specifications were insane. Main armament for 280mm naval guns in a turret, the same weapons mounted on German battleships. Secondary armament, one 128mm anti-tank gun, plus multiple 20mm anti-aircraft cannons. A crew of over 40 men would operate inside this mobile fortress. The Rat's armor would be 9 inches thick, strong enough to withstand any anti-tank weapon the Allies possessed. It would roll on massive treads, each one taller than a man. Nothing could stop it. Nothing could penetrate it. Hitler loved the idea. He authorized development immediately. This was exactly the kind of superweapon that fit his vision of German military dominance: overwhelming, terrifying, unstoppable. But Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments, looked at the practical reality and saw disaster. The Rat would consume fuel at a catastrophic rate. It would need constant refueling, making it vulnerable. Its weight meant it couldn't cross bridges. It would have to ford rivers or crush through obstacles. It was too big to transport by rail, too slow to avoid airstrikes, and most damningly, the resources needed to build one Rat could produce dozens of conventional tanks. In 1943, Speer convinced Hitler to cancel the project. The Rat never progressed beyond blueprints and scale models, but here's the frightening part. Declassified documents suggest the Nazis actually began preliminary construction on components. Somewhere at a German industrial facility, massive steel plates were being forged. Turret mechanisms were being tested. The monster was beginning to take physical form. What if they'd finished it? What if 3 or 4 of these land battleships had rolled into Stalingrad, impervious to Soviet anti-tank guns? What if they'd been deployed at Normandy, where their naval guns could have annihilated landing craft from miles away? Thank God they never found out if it would work. But the Rat wasn't even close to the most dangerous weapon on this list. Asterisk number 9. The Horton Ho. To 29, the stealth fighter. Asterisk February 1945. An experimental aircraft makes its first flight at Oranienburg Airfield near Berlin. The test pilot climbs into a cockpit unlike anything in the sky. No tail, no conventional fuselage, just a smooth, flying wing that looks like it came from another century. This is the Horten Ho 229, and it's about to make every Allied aircraft obsolete. The Horten brothers, Reimar and Walter, were visionaries. They'd been experimenting with flying wing designs since the 1930s, convinced that removing the tail and fuselage would create a faster, more efficient aircraft. By 1943, they'd caught the attention of Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe. Göring gave them specifications that seemed impossible. Build a fighter that could fly 1,000 kilometers, carry 1,000 kilograms of bombs, and fly at 1,000 kilometers per hour. The 3x1,000 requirement, the Horten Ho 229, came terrifyingly close, powered by two Junkers, Jumo, all for turbojet engines, the same engines used in the Me-262 jet fighter. The Ho 229 could reach speeds of 607 miles per hour. That's 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter in 1945, was armed with 430mm cannons, and could carry to 1,000-pound bombs. But here's what made it truly revolutionary. Its shape. The flying wing design created a small radar cross-section. Modern tests on the surviving Ho 229 prototype showed something shocking. The aircraft's shape, combined with the radar-absorbing properties of its skin coating, made it difficult to detect with 1940s British radar systems. The Nazis were building a stealth fighter. In 1945, if deployed in numbers, the Ho 229 could have devastated Allied bomber formations. It was fast enough to intercept, maneuverable enough to dogfight, and nearly invisible to radar. American B-17s and British Lancasters would have been sitting ducks. Only 3 prototypes were completed before war's end. One crashed on its test flight, killing the pilot. The other 2 were captured by advancing American forces. What happened next was telling. The Americans didn't just study the Ho 229, they disappeared it. The prototype was shipped to the United States and vanished into classified research programs. Some of the Horten brothers' design principles would later appear in the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber developed decades later. Coincidence? Or did American engineers learn something from that captured Nazi flying wing? But even a stealth jet fighter wasn't the most terrifying weapon the Nazis developed. Not even close. Number 8. The V3 supergun, the London destroyer. Beneath the hills of Pas-de-Calais in northern France, Nazi engineers were constructing something that shouldn't exist. A gun barrel 430 feet long, buried in concrete and steel, angled toward London 95 miles away. The V3 supergun. And it was designed to annihilate an entire city. You've heard of the V1 flying bomb and the V2 rocket, but the V3 was different. This was artillery on a scale never attempted before or since. The concept was based on a multi-charge principle. The massive barrel had side chambers positioned along its length. As the shell traveled up the barrel, sequential explosions in these chambers would accelerate it to incredible velocities. The final result, a 310-pound explosive shell fired at 5,000 feet per second, capable of hitting London with the force of a 1-ton bomb, and it could fire 300 rounds per hour. Imagine it, every 12 seconds, another shell screaming down on London. No warning, no time to take shelter. 24 hours a day, for weeks, for months. The psychological and physical devastation would be catastrophic. Hitler commissioned 5 V3 batteries, each with 25 barrels. If all had become operational, they could have launched 1,500 shells per hour at London. That's 36,000 shells per day. The site in France was called Hochdruck Pump, high-pressure pump, to disguise its true purpose. Construction began in September 1943. Thousands of forced laborers dug into the hillside, creating massive concrete bunkers to protect the guns from air attack. But Allied intelligence discovered the site. On July 6, 1944, 1 month after D-Day, RAF bombers struck with 617 Squadron's Special Tallboy bombs. These 6-ton penetrating bombs smashed through 20 feet of concrete and destroyed the V-3 installation before it could ever fire. Declassified documents reveal something chilling. One V-3 gun was actually completed and test-fired in December 1944 from a different location. It successfully lobbed shells into Luxembourg, proving the concept worked. What if the Allies hadn't discovered the Pas-de-Calais site? What if 125 V-3 barrels had opened fire on London in late 1944, just as the Allies were pushing into Germany? Could Britain have sustained that bombardment while maintaining the war effort? We came within months of finding out. But the V-3 supergun, as terrifying as it was, still wasn't the worst weapon on this list. Number 7. The Messerschmitt Me-264 America bomber. December 1942. In a conference room in Berlin, Adolf Hitler studied maps of the United States. His finger traced routes across the Atlantic Ocean, stopping at New York City, Washington, D.C., Detroit. Why, he asked his generals, can't we bomb them? It was a good question. America was producing the tanks, planes, and ships that were turning the tide against Germany. But American factories operated in perfect safety, thousands of miles from German bombers. If Germany could strike those factories, could bomb American cities, could bring the war home to America itself, the America bomber program was born. Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, and Junkers all submitted designs for an intercontinental bomber, but Messerschmitt's Me-264 was the most advanced. 4 engines, 5,500-mile range, capable of reaching New York from France and returning without refueling. It would carry 4,000 pounds of bombs, enough to devastate multiple city blocks. 3 prototypes were actually built. The first flew in December 1942. Test flights proved it could achieve the required range. All it needed was final refinement and mass production. Imagine the psychological impact. Americans in New York or Washington, hearing air raid sirens, watching anti-aircraft fire light up the night sky, feeling bombs fall on American soil for the first time since the War of 1812. Would American resolve have held? Or would public pressure have forced a negotiated peace, allowing Hitler to consolidate his hold on Europe? Allied intelligence learned of the America bomber program through intercepted communications. The response was immediate. Strategic bombing of Messerschmitt facilities became a top priority. In July 1944, Allied bombers destroyed the factory where the Me-264 was being developed. All 3 prototypes were destroyed, but here's what declassified Soviet documents reveal. When Soviet forces overran German positions in 1945, they found components for at least 6 more Me-264 bombers in various stages of assembly. The program was closer to deployment than anyone knew. And there's something else. After the war, American engineers studied the Me-264 design. Elements of it appear in the B-36 Peacemaker, America's first intercontinental bomber, developed in the late 1940s. The Nazis were building a weapon to strike America. They almost finished it, and when they failed, we took their blueprints and built our own version. But even the threat of bombers over New York wasn't the most dangerous Nazi secret weapon. Number 6. Sarin nerve gas, the invisible killer. This is where we enter truly dark territory. In 1938, German chemist Gerhard Schrader was developing insecticides at IG Farben's laboratories. He synthesized a new compound, an organophosphate, that was extraordinarily effective at killing insects. Too effective. Schrader and his team began experiencing symptoms during testing: vision problems, difficulty breathing, muscle convulsions. They discovered something far more deadly than an insecticide. They'd created the first nerve agent, Schrader reported his discovery to Nazi authorities, as required by law. The German army immediately classified the compound and began weaponization research. They named it sarin. Here's what sarin does. It's absorbed through skin contact or inhalation. Once inside the body, it shuts down the nervous system. Victims experience convulsions, loss of muscle control, respiratory failure. Death comes within minutes of high exposure, and it's invisible, odorless, and spreads quickly through the air. By 1944, Nazi Germany had produced approximately 12,000 tons of sarin. That's enough to kill tens of millions of people. They also developed tabun, an even more toxic nerve agent. Between tabun and sarin, the Nazis possessed the most lethal chemical weapons stockpile in human history. So why didn't they use it? The official explanation is that Hitler, himself a victim of gas attacks in World War I, was reluctant to initiate chemical warfare. But declassified intelligence suggests another reason. German generals believed the Allies had similar chemical weapons and would retaliate in kind. In reality, the Allies had no idea nerve agents even existed until after the war. But what if Hitler had known that? What if, in the final desperate months of 1945, with Allied armies closing in, the Nazis had deployed sarin against advancing troops, against civilian populations in occupied territories? The casualty numbers would have been apocalyptic. Gas masks designed for conventional chemical weapons offered no protection against nerve agents. Entire cities could have been exterminated. After Germany's surrender, Allied forces discovered the sarin production facilities. The chemical weapons were seized and destroyed, but not before American and Soviet scientists extensively documented the formulas. By the 1950s, both superpowers had developed their own nerve agent programs, based directly on captured Nazi research. The invisible killer the Nazis invented now fills the arsenals of multiple nations. It's been used in war crimes and terrorist attacks from Syria to Japan. We avoided the Nazis deploying it in World War II, but they opened Pandora's box, and we can never close it again. And still, sarin wasn't the most terrifying weapon on this list. #5. The Type 21 U-boat, the submarine that could have starved Britain. In the cold waters of the Atlantic, German U-boats were strangling Britain. By 1943, Allied shipping losses were catastrophic, but the Allies had developed countermeasures: sonar, depth charges, escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft. The Battle of the Atlantic was turning against Germany. Traditional U-boats were becoming death traps for their crews. German Naval Command knew they needed something revolutionary. They needed a submarine that could stay underwater indefinitely, that was faster submerged than surfaced, that could reload torpedoes while submerged, that was virtually undetectable. In 1943, they began developing the Type 21 U-boat, and it changed submarine warfare forever. The Type 21 looked different from conventional U-boats: streamlined hull, massive battery capacity, snorkel breathing device that allowed diesel engines to run while submerged. It could remain underwater for weeks, only surfacing briefly to recharge batteries via snorkel. Submerged speed, 17 knots, faster than most Allied escort vessels. It could outrun pursuers underwater. Surface ships hunting it would find only empty ocean. It carried 23 torpedoes and could fire salvos from 6 bow tubes. Revolutionary hydraulic reloading systems meant it could prepare another salvo in just 20 minutes, while submerged, while evading, while hunting its next target. And here's the terrifying part: it was nearly silent. The Type 21's electric motors produced minimal noise compared to conventional diesel submarines. Sonar operators described it as a ghost submarine. By the time you heard it, torpedoes were already in the water. Germany planned to build 300 Type 21 U-boats. If deployed in 1944, they would have devastated Allied shipping lanes. The invasion of Normandy might have been impossible. Landing ships would have been easy targets. Britain's supply lines would have been cut. But Allied bombing of German shipyards delayed production. Only for Type 21 boats became operational before war's end. None sank any ships, they simply ran out of time. However, two Type 21 U-boats did go on patrol in April 1945. They prowled the Atlantic undetected for weeks. Allied anti-submarine forces had no idea they were even there. The submarines returned to port without incident, having successfully demonstrated that they were completely undetectable with existing technology. After the war, the United States and Soviet Union seized surviving Type 21 submarines. American naval engineers studied them extensively. The USS Nautilus, America's first nuclear submarine launched in 1954, incorporated design features directly copied from the Type 21. Streamlined hull, high underwater speed, sustained submerged operation. The Nazis built the prototype for the modern submarine. If they'd deployed it a year earlier, the war might have ended very differently, but even the Ghost submarine wasn't the most dangerous. Nazi secret weapon. #4. The Fritz X guided bomb, the smart weapon *. September 9, 1943, the Italian battleship Roma, one of the largest warships in the Mediterranean, steams toward Allied-controlled waters to surrender after Italy's capitulation. German aircraft appear overhead. The crew isn't worried. Battleships are hard to sink from the air. Bombers aren't accurate enough to score direct hits on a moving ship. But these aren't conventional bombers. And these aren't conventional bombs. At 15,000 feet altitude, a German pilot releases a Fritz X guided bomb. The 3,500-pound weapon drops. Plunging toward Roma, the pilot watches through a bomb sight, guiding the bomb with a radio control stick, left, right, adjusting trajectory in real time. The Fritz X smashes through Roma's deck armor and detonates inside the ship. A massive explosion rips through the battleship. 15 minutes later, another Fritz X hits. Roma capsizes and sinks. 1,393 sailors died. This is the world's first precision-guided munition, the first smart bomb, and the Nazis were deploying it in 1943. The Fritz X used radio guidance. An operator in the attacking aircraft would watch the bomb fall, using a joystick to steer it onto target. The bomb had movable fins that responded to radio commands, allowing trajectory corrections mid-flight. Accuracy was stunning. Conventional bombing from high altitude hit targets maybe 2% of the time. The Fritz X had a hit rate over 50%. Germany used Fritz X bombs to devastating effect. They sank or damaged multiple Allied warships, the battleship HMS Warspite, cruisers USS Savannah and USS Philadelphia, destroyer HMS Janus, each one hit with pinpoint accuracy from miles away. Allied naval commanders were terrified. How do you defend against a bomb that can think, that can adjust course as you maneuver? Traditional evasive action didn't work. The bomb just corrected. The only solution was jamming the radio signals. Allied forces developed radio countermeasures that disrupted the guidance signals. Once jamming became widespread, Fritz X effectiveness dropped dramatically. But here's what declassified documents reveal. The Fritz X was only the beginning. Germany was developing more advanced guided weapons, the Henschel's 293 glide bomb, the X-4 wire-guided air-to-air missile, even early television-guided bombs. Imagine if these had been deployed in 1942 instead of 1943. Imagine if Germany had possessed smart weapons during the Battle of Britain, or at Pearl Harbor if they'd been allied with Japan. The entire nature of aerial warfare would have changed. Precision strikes would have been possible to decades before Vietnam. After the war, American scientists seized every Fritz X they could find. The technology was immediately classified. By the 1960s, the U.S. was deploying its own guided bombs, direct descendants of Nazi research. The smart weapons that defined modern warfare, from laser-guided bombs to cruise missiles, all trace their lineage back to the Fritz X. But even guided bombs weren't the most dangerous Nazi secret weapon. We're getting close now. Number 3. The aggregate for V-2 ballistic missile. The space-age weapon *, September 8, 1944. 6:43 p.m., London. A sound like thunder echoes across the city. Then silence. Then screaming. An explosion has just destroyed an apartment building in Chiswick. 16 people are dead. Dozens are wounded. Rescue workers rush to the scene, assuming it's another air raid. But there was no warning, no air raid sirens, no aircraft overhead, no sound before impact. What just happened? A rocket, launched from the Netherlands 200 miles away, arced into space at 3 times the speed of sound, then plummeted down onto London. The V-2 ballistic missile. And it was impossible to stop. The V-2 was the world's first long-range ballistic missile, and the first human-made object to reach space. Developed by Wernher von Braun and his team at Peenemünde. It was a marvel of engineering that was decades ahead of its time. 46 feet tall, 27,000 pounds at launch, powered by liquid oxygen and alcohol fuel, it climbed to an altitude of 55 miles technically in space, before arching down at Mach 4. By the time you heard it coming, you were already dead. Between September 1944 and March 1945, Germany launched over 3,000 V-2 rockets at Allied targets. Most hit London or Antwerp. Over 9,000 people were killed, thousands more wounded. But the true horror wasn't the casualties. It was the implications. The V-2 couldn't be intercepted. Radar could sometimes detect the launch, but there was no defense. Fighter planes couldn't catch it. Anti-aircraft guns couldn't hit it. It moved too fast, too high. If you saw it coming, you were witnessing your own death. Churchill's military advisors told him something chilling. If Germany had deployed V-2 south, -1 month earlier, if they'd had time to produce them in greater numbers, the invasion of Normandy might have been impossible. Imagine V-2s raining down on Portsmouth and Southampton, destroying the invasion fleet before it could launch. Imagine V-2 south hitting supply depots, command centers, troop concentrations. There would have been no D-Day, no liberation of France, no march into Germany. The war only ended because Germany ran out of time. V-2 production was ramping up when Allied forces overran the launch sites. And here's what happened next. The Americans and Soviets raced to capture V-2 technology and the scientists who built it. Operation Paperclip brought Wernher von Braun and 1,600 German scientists to the United States. The Soviets captured the V-2 production facilities. Von Braun's team would later design the Saturn V rocket that put Americans on the moon. Soviet engineers, using captured V-2 technology, developed the R-7 rocket that put Sputnik in orbit. The space race was built on Nazi rocket science. The ICBMs that defined the Cold War were V-2 descendants. The rocket that took Neil Armstrong to the moon was designed by the same man who designed the weapon that killed 9,000 people in London. We won World War II, but we won it using Nazi technology. And that uncomfortable truth haunts space agencies and military commands to this day. But even the V-2 wasn't the most terrifying Nazi secret weapon. The top 2 entries will show you how close Hitler came to weapons that could have ended civilization itself. #2. The Nazi nuclear program, the bomb that almost was * in a secret facility deep in the Harz Mountains. German physicists were working on a project that would make everything else on this list irrelevant. They were building an atomic bomb, and they were closer than history admits. The official narrative is that Germany's nuclear program was years behind the Allied Manhattan Project, that Nazi scientists never achieved a sustained nuclear chain reaction, that Hitler's anti-Semitism drove away the Jewish physicists who might have succeeded. But declassified documents tell a more disturbing story. Werner Heisenberg, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, led Germany's nuclear program. He understood the theoretical physics. Germany had uranium resources from occupied Czechoslovakia. They had heavy water production in Norway. They had the industrial capacity. What they didn't have was time. In 1942, Heisenberg met with Speer and told him Germany could produce a bomb, but it would take at least 2 years and enormous resources. Speer, facing more immediate needs like tanks and aircraft, scaled back the nuclear program's priority. That decision may have saved the world. Because here's what recently declassified records show: Germany actually achieved a functioning nuclear reactor in 1944. Not a sustained reaction, but they got closer than anyone thought. In a cave near Heigerlich, German scientists had assembled a working pile that generated neutrons from uranium. They were potentially months away from a controlled chain reaction. What if Speer had prioritized the nuclear program in 1942? What if Germany had devoted the resources to it that America did? The Manhattan Project cost $1 billion and employed 130,000 people. Germany could have matched that scale. A Nazi atomic bomb in 1944 changes everything. Drop it on Moscow, drop it on London, drop it on the American fleet at Normandy. The war ends in Nazi victory. Hitler controls Europe. The Holocaust continues unchecked. The world falls into darkness for generations. We came closer to that nightmare than most people. No, when Allied forces advanced into Germany in 1945, teams of scientists and intelligence officers raced ahead of regular troops. Their mission: find and secure German nuclear facilities before the Soviets got them. This was so important that some combat operations were delayed to prioritize the nuclear search. They found the cave at Heigerlich. They found uranium, they found the scientists, and they found documents showing that Germany's nuclear program had been progressing steadily, despite setbacks. Right up to the war's end, those scientists were immediately taken to America and Britain. The uranium was seized, the documents were classified, and remained so for decades. But here's the final disturbing detail. In 1945, a German submarine, U-234, surrendered to American forces while crossing the Atlantic. In its cargo hold, 560 kilograms of uranium oxide in steel cylinders, bound for Japan. Germany was shipping weapons-grade uranium to its ally. If U-234 had reached Japan, would Japanese scientists have achieved what German scientists couldn't? We'll never know. The submarine surrendered 2 days after Hitler's death. The uranium was confiscated and later used in the Manhattan Project. The atomic bomb that ended World War II may have been partially built from materials intended for a Nazi bomb. But even the threat of a Nazi nuclear weapon wasn't the most terrifying item on this list, because the number one secret weapon, the one I'm about to reveal, was even more dangerous than an atomic bomb. And we still don't fully understand what it was. #1. Die Glock, the bow, the weapon beyond comprehension. *, we've reached the end of our countdown. And what I'm about to describe sounds like science fiction, but it's based on documented witness, testimony, declassified intelligence reports, and physical evidence that still exists today. In a secret facility beneath Wenceslas mine in Poland, the Nazis were testing something called Die Glock, a bell. Here's what we know from testimony by SS General Jacob Spornberg, who confessed to tales before his execution in 1952. Die Glock was a device approximately 9 feet in diameter and 12 feet high, shaped like a bell. It consisted of 2 counter-rotating cylinders filled with a violet-colored metallic substance stored in lead containers. The substance was codenamed Serum 525. Its composition remains unknown. When activated, Die Glock emitted a pale blue glow and hummed with a low-frequency vibration. The area around it had to be cleared of all living things, because Die Glock killed. Initial tests killed several scientists, Plants exposed to the device wilted and decomposed within hours, turning to black sludge. Animals placed near it died with crystallized blood and disintegrated tissue. But something else happened, something that made Die Glock more important than any other Nazi project. Test subjects reported time distortion. Clocks ran at different speeds near the device. Electromagnetic effects disrupted all electronic equipment in the vicinity. The Nazis believed they'd discovered something fundamental about spacetime itself. Some researchers think Die Glock was an attempt to create an anti-gravity device. Others believe it was a time manipulation weapon. Declassified intelligence. Documents from 1945 show that Allied forces discovered the Wenceslas mine facility after German evacuation. The complex had been destroyed, but physical evidence remained, a concrete structure now called the henge. A circular test stand covered in a ceramic substance designed to withstand extreme temperatures. D. Something else. Soil samples from the area showed isotope ratios inconsistent with natural occurrence. Something had happened there that altered matter at the atomic level. Die Glock disappeared in April 1945. The lead scientist, SS General Hans Kammler, vanished at the same time. He was never found, never tried at Nuremberg. Some believe he escaped to Argentina. Others think he was extracted by American intelligence. Because here's the thing, if Die Glock was real, if it actually functioned even partially as described, it represents technology we still don't fully understand today. What if Germany had perfected it? What if they'd learned to weaponize whatever effect it created? A device that distorts time and space could do anything. Make aircraft invisible, destroy matter at the molecular level, create impenetrable force fields. The implications are beyond comprehension. Some researchers believe Die Glock technology was recovered by the United States and became the basis for classified anti-gravity research programs. The B-2 bomber's alleged electrostatic field systems bear suspicious similarities to Die Glock's described effects. Others think the entire thing was disinformation, that Die Glock never existed and was invented by the Nazis to waste Allied intelligence resources. But the testimony exists, the physical site exists, the isotope anomalies exist. Something happened at Wenceslas mine. Something that scared the Nazis enough to destroy the facility rather than let it be captured. And that's why Die Glock tops this list. Because unlike every other weapon we've discussed, we don't know if it worked. We don't know what it was supposed to do. We don't know where it went. And that's the most terrifying possibility of all, that somewhere, buried in classified files, or hidden in an underground facility, Die Glock still exists, waiting. These 10 weapons represent the culmination of Nazi Germany's scientific and industrial might. Some were real, some were barely beyond blueprints. But all of them shared one characteristic: they almost worked. If Germany had deployed these weapons 6 months to a year earlier, if Hitler had prioritized them differently, if Allied intelligence hadn't discovered them in time, you'd be watching this video in German. If you were allowed to watch videos at all, we owe our freedom to the scientists, spies, and soldiers who stopped these weapons before they could be fully deployed. To the Allied bombers who destroyed factories, to the resistance members who sabotaged production, to the intelligence officers who stole secrets. They saved the world from technology that would have changed history. But here's the unsettling truth. We built our modern world on Nazi research. Our rockets, our jets, our submarines, our guided missiles, our nerve agents, all of them trace back to captured German technology. We won the war, but we won it by becoming the inheritors of their science. If this countdown of declassified Nazi secret weapons fascinated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden history the government doesn't want widely known. Leave a comment telling me which weapon on this list you think was the most dangerous, and share this with anyone who thinks they know everything about World War II. Because the truth is always stranger and more frightening than the history books admit. Thanks for watching.